You probably think you have total control over your financial decisions, right? Not always. The truth is, at this very moment, your mind might be playing against you. Most people spend their entire lives working hard, saving, and trying to get ahead, without realizing they are falling into an invisible trick created by their own brain, a psychological loop that forces you to spend money to signal a status you don't actually have, while secretly keeping you trapped in scarcity. We were biologically programmed to seek social approval, and the modern market has learned exactly how to hack this ancestral trigger to make you hand over your hard-earned wealth in exchange for crumbs of attention. That is why you see people taking on massive debt to parade around in financed luxury cars, while true multimillionaires walk around completely invisible, driving ordinary vehicles and focusing on what really matters: real freedom. In this video, we are going far beyond the finance cliches you find out there. We are going to dissect the neuroscience behind consumerism, the effect of dopamine on your wallet, and, according to behavioral psychology, how to disarm the mental traps that sabotage your wealth. If you want to understand exactly how your brain tricks you into staying poor, and above all, how to shield your mind to break this cycle once and for all, watch this essay until the end. What you will discover here could completely change your relationship with money. The act of impulse buying is not a character flaw or a lack of willpower. It is a purely neurochemical process. At the center of this behavior is dopamine, a neurotransmitter often confused with the sensation of pleasure, but which is actually the chemical compound of anticipation and pursuit. The human brain operates based on an ancient mechanism called the reward system. In the past, dopamine was released when our ancestors found a food source or a safe shelter, motivating them to repeat that action to ensure survival. However, the modern market has learned exactly how to hack this biological circuit for commercial purposes. When you walk into a store or browse a shopping app, your brain does not react to the object you are about to acquire, but rather to the promise of reward that it represents. Behavioral psychologists call this phenomenon retail therapy. The dopamine spike floods your nervous system the moment you decide to buy, during the choosing, the anticipation, and the swiping of the card. It is an instant rush of euphoria. The core problem in financial psychology is that this neurochemical spike is incredibly short-lived. As soon as ownership of the object becomes a reality, dopamine levels plummet drastically. This rapid drop creates the habituation effect, also known in behavioral science as the hedonic treadmill. To achieve the exact same feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment next time, the individual is forced to make increasingly larger, more frequent, and more expensive purchases. The brain adapts to the previous stimulus and demands a bigger dose of novelty to fire the same volume of neurotransmitters. It is a destructive feedback loop. You consume, not for the utility of the good, but to relieve the discomfort of the previous dopamine crash. A classic case that illustrates the violence of this psychological mechanism is the story of Ike Batista. At the peak of his career, the former Brazilian billionaire didn't just accumulate productive assets. He exhibited a pathological need to signal extreme wealth to feed his own ego and respond to this cycle of visual stimuli. He went as far as placing a high-end luxury sports car, a multi-million-dollar McLaren Mercedes, right in the middle of his living room. The vehicle ceased to be a means of transportation and became a purely dopaminergic object, a physical monument strictly aimed at generating spikes of external validation and fulfilling a need for social superiority. When the market structure collapsed, the car was seized, and the illusion of power crumbled along with his wealth. This proves that when an individual's financial psychology is indexed to the dopamine loop generated by status symbols, consumerism completely loses its connection to real well-being. The individual becomes behaviorally dependent on extravagant purchases to mask an internal inadequacy. The moment you allow the market to dictate your mind's reward triggers, you willingly hand over the keys to your financial stability and accept the invitation to run a rat race that, by biological definition, has no finish line. The human being is a social animal, and as such carries in its DNA an ancient biological need to signal status to its group. In the primitive past, the position an individual occupied in the tribe's hierarchy directly determined their chances of survival, access to the best resources, and protection against predators. Showing strength, power, and resources was not vanity, it was a matter of life or death. The core problem of modernity is that the environment has changed drastically, but our brain keeps operating with the exact same software from thousands of years ago. The financial market and large corporations discovered exactly how to hack this evolutionary trigger, turning a survival need into a trap that drains your wealth. In psychology and behavioral economics, this phenomenon is classified as conspicuous consumption. We do not buy high-value goods for the object's practical utility, but rather for the nonverbal message it sends to the streets. When someone finances a luxury car that compromises half of their monthly income, that person is not buying an efficient means of transportation, they are buying a social signaling tool. It is a desperate attempt by the ego to scream to the world, "I am successful, I belong at the top, I have value." The object begins to function as an artificial substitute for a fragile identity or for an internal emptiness that the person cannot fill in any other way. The big trick your brain plays on you is making you believe that, by acquiring this external symbol of success, you will finally achieve the respect and validation you desire. But the technical reality of this game is perverse. Ostentation creates a social optical illusion. People on the street do not look at the driver of a luxury car admiring their intelligence or financial capacity. They look at the object and imagine themselves in that person's place. The respect the buyer thinks they are receiving is, in reality, just a reflection of other people's desire for that same material good. You spend money you don't have to impress people who don't care about you. A fascinating historical example of how controlling this biological trigger separates true wealth from false appearance is the biography of Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. Even after becoming the richest man in the United States and controlling a multi-billion-dollar retail empire, Walton categorically refused to participate in the game of conspicuous consumption. Until the end of his life, he drove an old faded Ford F-150 pickup truck. When reporters asked why the richest man in the country drove such an ordinary vehicle, his response was surgical. "What am I supposed to do? Drive a Ferrari to carry my hunting dogs?" Walton had a financial mind completely shielded against the judgment of others because his self-esteem was anchored in his factual achievements, not in the approval of strangers. He understood that using money to feed the ego through visual ostentation is a clear sign of financial and psychological insecurity. When you need an expensive object to validate who you are, you become a slave to the market's opinion. The invisible millionaire breaks this chain because they realize that the biggest and most powerful weapon for controlling the ego is having the financial capacity to buy absolutely everything money can buy, but making the conscious choice not to. The next step to understanding how our minds are sabotaged on a daily basis requires looking at the naked truth of our household finances through what psychologists call the appearance tax. It is highly likely that you identify with this scenario. The constant feeling that no matter how much your salary increases, your bank account always seems to be racing just to break even at the end of the month. This invisible chokehold doesn't happen because you are incapable of managing your money, but rather because we have been silently conditioned to accept a cost of living that is artificially inflated by our need for social validation. In the West, the average citizen is trapped in a perverse mathematical snare. Recent economic data shows that the average monthly payment for a new car loan has crossed the staggering barrier of $700. When you add mandatory insurance costs, taxes, and high-performance maintenance to that figure, an individual ends, Ronald Read was not a miserable man, he was a free man. He understood with deep self-empathy that refusing to pay the appearance tax was the only real way to buy his own peace of mind. While the masses use their salaries to signal temporary status through endless installments, Reed used his surplus to buy shares of companies that worked for him. When you lock your ego in the trunk and decide to stop paying the price of other people's opinions, your relationship with money changes. You discover that the opposite of being poor isn't looking rich. The opposite of being poor is being free. To move forward in breaking this trick that the brain plays on us, we need to enter the behavioral science laboratory to understand the next pillar, the science of status, the new rich versus old money. It is highly probable that you have already noticed this in your own social circle or on social media. The person who just got a raise or a bonus at work rushes to finance the latest model of an imported vehicle or post pictures wearing clothes covered in massive logos. On the other hand, the owner of the largest company in your region usually moves around discreetly, often wearing an unbranded polo shirt and driving a car that draws absolutely no attention on the street. This glaring difference in behavior is no mere coincidence. It was extensively documented by scientists in a classic study published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Consumer Research. Researchers analyzed how different social classes utilize consumerism and uncovered the concept of status signaling. The study proved that individuals belonging to the nouveau riche class, or people who are still in an intermediate layer desperately seeking social approval and acceptance, suffer from an inflated biological need to use loud brands and visual ostentation. The brains of these individuals seek a quick dopamine rush from a compliment or the envious glance of a stranger at a traffic light. It is their way of signaling, "I've made it." In contrast, people of solid wealth and traditional billionaires utilize what science calls subtle signaling. They buy products of the highest quality, but ones that are completely devoid of visible logos. Scientifically, this happens because those who are already at the top have no neurological need to prove absolutely anything to those below them. They prefer the effect of quiet luxury, where a highly expensive asset is only recognized by its peers, functioning as an invisible social filter. In practice, most people suffer from the problem of wasting an absurd amount of mental and financial energy trying to signal a wealth they do not yet possess, destroying their own future to create an image in the present. How can you solve this problem in your real life today? Financial psychology offers two practical behavioral strategies. The first is the 72-hour filter for status purchases. Before making any high-value purchase involving designer clothing, latest generation electronics, or upgrading a vehicle, force your brain out of the dopaminergic loop by waiting exactly 3 days. During this time, ask yourself the following question. If I were banned from taking photos of this object and no one in the world could ever know I bought it, would I still spend this money solely for its pure utility? If the answer is no, your brain is trying to buy social validation, not a useful product. The second is the signaling substitution rule. Shift the focus of what generates your personal pride. Instead of seeking external validation through what people can see on your body or in your garage, start associating your self-confidence with the size of your invisible financial reserve. True mental power resides in looking at a storefront or a luxury car on the street and knowing you have the exact amount of money in your brokerage account to buy that asset in cash, yet choosing the freedom of not needing it. When you understand the science of status, you stop being manipulated by marketing strategies that try to exploit your insecurities. You discover that true financial security goes hand in hand with invisibility. Those who truly have real money worry about accumulating wealth and peace of mind, leaving the exhausting task of looking rich to those who are still trapped in the appearance snare. To take the next step in our journey of deconstructing the traps of the mind, we need to analyze the next pillar, the practical extremes, the psychology of Warren Buffett and Ingvar Kamprad. When we look at classic finance guidelines, we are often given abstract rules about saving and investing. But the best way to understand how unshakable self-confidence eliminates the need for ostentation is by observing the actual behavior of those who reach the absolute top of the global financial pyramid and chose invisibility as a lifestyle. The first striking and deeply comforting example for our reflection comes from Warren Buffett, widely considered the greatest investor of all time. Despite controlling a fortune that surpasses the tens of billions of dollars mark, Buffett lives in the exact same 5-bedroom house in Omaha, Nebraska, that he bought in 1958 for just over $31,000. For him, the physical space and location perfectly meet his basic needs for comfort, privacy, and security. Instead of hiring private drivers or flaunting fleets of Italian supercars to prove his success, Buffett spent decades driving ordinary American vehicles and maintaining an identical morning routine, which includes stopping by a fast food drive-thru to buy a breakfast that costs just $3. His financial psychology is of a crystal clear simplicity. The real value of his life lies in the pleasure of exercising his intellect through reading and investing, not in the sophistication of his material goods. He does not need an object to signal his importance to the world because his mind is focused on the game that truly matters. The second emblematic and legendary case is that of Ingvar Kamprad, the iconic founder of the global furniture giant IKEA. Kamprad, whose net worth frequently placed him on the list of the wealthiest people on the planet, took the concept of minimalism and waste control to an almost poetic level. For decades, he chose to fly exclusively in economy class on commercial airlines, routinely used public transportation, and drove an old Volvo manufactured in the early 90s, using the vehicle until it was no longer in a safe driving condition. There are even reports that he would cut his hair in developing countries during his business trips to save small fractions of money. However, the psychology behind Kamprad's behavior was not based on self-imposed misery or avarice, but rather on the power of institutional example and leadership of character. He deeply understood that if the leader of a company that sells affordable furniture to the masses flaunted luxury, opulence, and waste, the entire culture of efficiency and the credibility of his corporation would be destroyed from the inside out. He transformed his personal simplicity into the greatest tool of character and leadership within his organization. How can you apply the example of these brilliant minds to resolve the weight of social judgment in your life today? Behavioral psychology extracts two practical lessons from these billionaires to shield your mind. First, decouple your identity from your assets. Understand that your value as a professional, a parent, a partner, or a human being is measured by your integrity, your knowledge, and the impact you have on people's lives, and not by the price tag of the object you display. When your self-confidence is internal, the need to use money as a shield to protect the ego completely vanishes. Second, practice efficiency of purpose. Before upgrading something that already works perfectly in your life, whether it is your phone, your house, or your car, assess whether this change will bring a factual improvement to your health, your free time, or your family's well-being. If the change serves only to elevate your visual status in the eyes of society, do as Buffett and Kamprad did. Choose the stability and peace of mind of keeping what is efficient. You discover that true sophistication does not lie in accumulating things to show off, but in mastering your own pride and maintaining total control over the only thing money cannot buy, your own identity. To advance toward a complete understanding of financial psychology, we must cross a crucial line and analyze the sixth pillar of our essay, which many content creators prefer to ignore. The scarcity pathology, the dark side of merely accumulating. Up to this point, we have celebrated the ability to restrain the impulses of the ego, lock away vanity, and avoid the appearance tax. However, behavioral science issues a stern warning. There is an extremely dangerous threshold where the healthy habit of saving mutates into an anxiety disorder focused on chronic hoarding. Financial psychology explains that individuals who build wealth driven purely by a visceral fear of returning to poverty develop severe mental rigidity. When your sole life goal becomes watching a number rise on a computer screen, while you refuse to buy a quality coffee, take a profound trip with the people you love, or invest in your own well-being, you have not achieved financial freedom. You have merely swapped the addiction of spending for the addiction of hoarding. And the naked truth is that both behaviors are symptoms of the exact same chronic disease, fear.